Welcome to Workplace Psychology with Dr. Martha Grajdek. I'm Dr. Martha Grajdek. This podcast examines a wide variety of work-related issues through the lens of industrial and organizational psychology. And while many of the topics discussed here may be seen as intended for white-collar employees and their employers, in reality, the ideas presented here are applicable across organizations and industries. Additionally, many of the topics discussed here may be applicable outside of the workplace. I encourage you to examine what's presented here, apply what makes sense to you, and simply discard the rest. In a tight labor marketplace, the best hire that you may be able to find might already be part of your own organization. There are many benefits associated with hiring people from within. Studies show that internal mobility drives engagement, retention, and knowledge continuity. However, it's important to remember that those things are most likely true when the psychology of fairness and visibility are addressed. Whatever the job market may be at any given time, one of the best places to begin searching for talent may be within your own organization. You can think of it as a hidden job market. That's not to say searching for candidates outside of the organization should be eliminated or put on the back burner in any way whatsoever. However, all too often, this internal job market is either forgotten or purposely ignored. And while it's great to bring in talent from the outside to introduce into the organization new skills, new talents, new ideas, internal mobility can be just as important for an organization. Something else to consider is perceived favoritism as opposed to transparency and fairness. Sometimes this can happen when employees are hired from within or promoted from within. There may be a perception by those on the outside of the organization that there is a certain level of favoritism. But at the end of the day, the best candidate is the candidate who should be brought on board. How the best candidate is defined will depend on the organization, on any given situation, and the organizational needs. So that definition will change, which is why it's so important to consider all options when seeking candidates for open positions. Let's look at this through the lens of psychology. Psychologist Albert Bandura defined self-efficacy as people's belief that they have an ability to control their functioning. In other words, self-efficacy focuses on capability. This is different from self-esteem, which focuses on one's worthiness. Just as self-efficacy can be considered in terms of individuals, it can also be considered in a broader term, in terms of the organization. So as we think about where an organization finds talent to fill open positions, to fill needs within the company, the organization's self-efficacy comes into play. This is why being open to seeking candidates from outside of the organization as well as from within the organization is so important. Having more options will present more and or better candidates for the organization. This leads me into another theory, specifically Victor Vroom's expectancy theory of motivation, which suggests that people behave in ways that are related to whatever results they're expecting. In other words, people's behavior is motivated by results that they are expecting. This is just as valid and true for organizations as a whole. Organizations will be motivated by the results that they desire or expect. It's no surprise then that behaviors or steps taken when seeking new talent or seeking to fill needs and or positions within the company are expanded so that more candidates or more qualified candidates are found. The last thing that I want to touch upon in terms of this lens of psychology as we consider finding and recruiting talent for an organization is the idea of perceived fairness or perceived justice. When it comes to perceived procedural justice, it tends to be related to the perception of fairness in decision making. This is a big one for organizations to consider, especially since this perceived justice can be perceived by anyone, both within the organization and those watching from the outside. This is where finding the right balance comes into play. An organization will do well to seek new talent from as many sources as possible. And that in itself is something that could be considered as being solely for the organization's benefit. However, it's also something that will contribute to higher perceived justice when under the scrutiny of others. Beyond the psychology of seeking and bringing on board the right talent, the organization also has to consider a certain systems design. One being the talent marketplaces, and I've already mentioned the importance of seeking out talent not only from outside of the organization, which is very important, but also from within the organization, which is just as critical. Internal mobility is tremendous and can have many benefits. However, when not executed properly, it can be fraught with issues. When seeking new candidates, an organization absolutely has to create and consider skills taxonomies. These are exhaustive skills inventories that are relevant to the organization, to the industry, and to each specific position within the organization. Let us look at hiring new talent through the lens of leadership. Whether we're talking about leaders or managers, it's important that bringing the right people on board is not only right for the organization, right for the department, but is done for the right reasons. We have to consider things such as mobility criteria. As I already mentioned, internal mobility can come with many benefits. However, when not done properly or for the wrong reasons, it can create chaos and resentment. Managers have to have a reason to not hoard talent. It can be difficult to let go of competent, reliable employees, but it's important to remember that competence, talent, and reliability should not be a reason to punish someone by not promoting them or letting them move upwards or onwards from their current position. The other thing to consider with internal mobility is post-move support. Internal mobility can be an exciting prospect for an individual employee, but it's important to remember that post-move support is needed. Organizations will do well to follow that employee with the support they need as they move within the company. Just as we have to consider leaders and managers when discussing new talent acquisition, we also have to consider employees who are currently within the organization. Employees who wish to have some kind of mobility within the organization have to focus on their skills, not only honing their skills, but also advertising their skills, making their skills known. Make sure that your resumes, your CVs, your portfolios are always updated. Consider seeking mentorship, whether that's within the company or outside of the company. This is someone who can help you to gain mobility within the organization in a way that is interesting and valuable to you. Organizations are absolutely responsible for their own metrics. They must be able to collect and analyze data as it relates to bringing talent on board and moving people within the organization, meaning internal mobility. Keeping track of things such as time to fill positions, move rates across demographics, and post-move engagement and performance signals are a great place to start. As this episode comes to an end, let's review what was discussed. Regardless of the current job market, it can be challenging for any organization to find the right talent. This is why it's so important to remember that potentially forgotten marketplace, which is found within the organization. This is where internal mobility comes into play. There's much to consider when deciding on where to seek out talent for the organization's need. There are psychological considerations, system designs, leader and manager considerations, and of course, things for employees to consider as well. Collecting data and analyzing trends is a great way for any organization to better understand how talent recruitment has worked in the past and what will likely work going forward. Of course, at the end of the day, one source is not better than the other. Seeking candidates from external sources is just as important and can be just as beneficial as seeking candidates from within. As this week unfolds, I invite you to consider internal mobility for your own organization. If you are in management or leadership positions, have you considered internal mobility within your own organization? Are you missing out on potential talent? And for individual employees, I invite you to make sure that your resumes, CVs, and portfolios are always updated. This will allow you to better understand and remember all of your own skills, talents, and experience that can then be conveyed when new opportunities present themselves within your organization or anywhere else for that matter. For those of you who experience this podcast in an audio-only version, I encourage you to check out my YouTube channel, Stress Free with Dr. G, where you can find the video version of the podcast. While you're there, check out some of the other videos. They focus on stress management. As I mentioned, Stress Free with Dr. G can be found on YouTube. The link for that is in the description below. Thank you for joining me today. Please subscribe to this podcast. I look forward to seeing you here again next time. Until then, I wish you joy and well-being.